the home of inspiration every day.
Most people give up on themselves easily. You know the human spirit is powerful.
From news,
countries across the globe have been hit by the COVID-19 virus.
Views.
There's a global trend to see an increase in GBV incidences, specifically domestic violence.
Sports.
What's he say? It's a really good ball. It's Shabalala.
And music to inspire you every day. This is Vuka Online, your inspiration radio station.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of The Cycle right here on Vuka Online Radio with me, your host, Mogale Mothale, Monday, the 24th of March, 2025. Thank you so much for streaming this evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening from wherever you are. I know that we have people listening to us from across the globe. We have listeners from the United States. We have listeners from Germany. We have listeners from everywhere across the globe. Welcome to this Monday, the 24th edition of The Cycle. And we also thank Mongezi Makalema for the news bulletin. He will be coming back at 7 p.m. to bring you the latest in the news. That's what we do, as I always say. That's what we do to make sure that you are informed. You know what's happening in the country, on the continent, and of course, even across the globe. This evening on The Cycle, we are going to do exactly that, making sure that you are informed about what is happening around you and everywhere across the globe. And this evening, we will be looking into the strained South Africa-US diplomatic relations. It's been crazy in the last few months. Just about a week ago or so, we heard of Ebrahim Rasool, who has returned from Washington, D.C. because he was declared persona non grata by Mark Rubio, the Secretary of State in the United States, after making comments that Donald Trump is actually perpetuating white supremacy in the United States, and that got him in trouble. And by the way, I was supposed to have actually attended that webinar by the Mapungube Institute where Ebrahim Rasool was speaking, but I was not able to attend. I could have actually heard him speak right there, and I would be able to say, but actually that's not what he meant. That thin line between a diplomat who's expressing his views and maybe things that a diplomat cannot say. That line, somehow others feel that it was crossed, others feel that actually that line was not crossed. This is the man who was just expressing himself about the current administration of Donald Trump. But anyway, there's a lot. We are going to be talking about this with Tendai Mbanje, who will be joining us later on the show. And like I said, there's a lot. Expropriation Act has actually gotten us in trouble with Donald Trump, something that it is a right for us to do. We have to do this to correct the injustices of the past. We can't allow Donald Trump to fiddle in our domestic matters and what policy to adopt, what policy not to adopt. And there's a whole lot that has been going into Donald Trump's ears. If it's not Elon Musk, is the Cape Independence Advocacy Group that are now going to the United States to say to Donald Trump, please help us, please put pressure on the Western Cape government and pressurize them to actually allow for the referendum for the people of the Western Cape to decide if they want to be independent or not. We have the AfriForum that has been going to the United States to say to Donald Trump, please put sanctions on the ANC leaders because they've got race-based policies that are actually disadvantaging the minority groups in South Africa. Bad things are happening. Hey, good evening, Bazanan. There's a lot. I can go on and on. There's a lot that is happening in South Africa with what is currently happening right now. The DA also went to Washington, D.C. to engage the US government. There's a lot, but Tendai Mbanje will be joining us right after, not after the break, but later on the show on the line to talk to us more about this. And we are also going to be looking into what is happening currently in the DRC. We know that last week the two leaders of DRC, Felix Tshisekedi as well as Paul Kagame of Rwanda, met in Qatar to talk about a ceasefire deal, which luckily it looks like it's going to materialize. We just don't know how is this going to happen, when it's going to happen, but Tendai Mbanje will be helping us to unpack that later on the show. And of course, you can be part of the conversation. You can do that by submitting your comments on all our social media platforms. We are at Vuka Online Radio on Facebook, on Instagram, as well as on X. You can actually leave your message there. You can comment on this show. You can comment on whatever it is that is going to be raised during our conversation with Tendai Mbanje. So that is what we have on the show this evening. But first, after this short break, we are going to take you through some of the key highlights of the week. Stay tuned.
How do you know the life of personal coach you're about to work with is who they say they are? How do you know if they can do the job? At the Africa Board for Coaching, Consulting and Coaching Psychology, we can tell you. So, before you share your secrets and spend your money, check with us first. Visit www.abccccp.com or call us on 012-751-7608. The ABCCP, the professional body for coaches.
Welcome back to the show this evening with me, your host, Mogale Mothale. We welcome you. For those who have just joined us, this is The Cycle, the show that comes to you every Monday from 6 until 7 p.m. Just before we took a break, in the introduction, I spoke about the fact that we are going to start with some key highlights of the week before we go into our conversation with Tendai Mbanje, who is going to help us unpack the US-South Africa relations as well as current developments in the DRC with regards to the ceasefire deal that was agreed to in Qatar last week. Let's start here. The South African ambassador in the United States of America, Ebrahim Rasool, was declared the persona non grata and was expelled from the United States. He was given a few days to leave the country, and he has since arrived in South Africa, and we are now looking to the president to decide as to who will be replacing Ebrahim Rasool in the US. It's a tough one, I must say. It's a tough one given how strained the relationships between the two nations are. So whoever is going to be chosen to go to the United States, to the Washington, D.C., must be able to put up with what is currently happening there. We have seen how Donald Trump has been treating, the Ukrainian president. And I can tell you now, there is no president who wants to be humiliated like that. And it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you are in. I mean, that was just bizarre, and it cannot be tolerated. So we are waiting for the presidency last week through the spokesperson Vincent Magwenya saying that the president will also consult his party, the ANC, as to who will go and replace Ebrahim Rasool in the United States. But that process cannot be rushed. That's what he said. So that's the story with regards to our U.S. Relations with regards to our ambassador. By the way, the United States hasn't appointed an ambassador here in South Africa yet since the resignation of the ambassador late last year. The ambassador who was here, who left late last year. So South America hasn't, appointed an ambassador as yet. And we know that there are people who have been going to the United States. We spoke about the Cape Independence Advocacy Group that has been going to the United States to mobilize support from the U.S. government to pressurize or to put pressure on the Western Cape government to allow a referendum of the Cape Independence. We know that the AfriForum has been going there. The Orania group. There are many groups that has been meeting with the US. And I was talking to somebody to say that, I don't know why all of a sudden, there are these trips to Washington just to convince the US government to say, come and meddle into our issue. I think that's really unfair. Let's take a listen to what Vincent Makwenya had to say, trying to answer this question with regard to the groups that have been going into the United States.
The situation, isn't it? No, it is. It is inflaming the situation, in fact. But on the other hand, our American counterparts will use their own discretion with respect to how they engage parties that are seeking to divide South Africa, that are seeking to return South Africa to a period that we've long passed, one that's still deeply etched in our DNA in terms of its painful history. And so we'll leave it to our counterparts in the US to decide how they engage these parties. As a government, we can't stop people from boarding an aeroplane and flying to a destination. But at the same time, we will reiterate the message that these groups who are heading to Washington do not represent the majority of South Africans, whether it's the Orania movement or it's AfriForum or it's this independence, Cape Independence advocacy. They do not represent the majority of South Africans. In fact, even AfriForum does not represent the majority of Afrikaans-speaking South Africans. We know that for a fact. So it's up to them how they receive these delegations. But yes, it is a concern for us. What we would rather have is have people engage here in the country over whatever issues that they may have. But we take comfort in the fact that the majority of South Africans have rejected the divisive stance that has been taken.
Well, yes, that was Vincent Makwenya responding to a question during the media briefing last week, where the presidency has been engaging, the media on the current developments, particularly with this U.S.-South Africa relations. Let's now take a listen to a conversation between, or an interview between Clement Manjatela on SABC last week with Phil Craig, who is representing or leading the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, because this is another group that argues that they must go to the United States to engage with the U.S. government.
It's a pleasure to be with you this evening.
Why are you trying to get the US to intervene in South Africa's internal affairs?
Well, so in the first instance, we're not particularly trying to get the US to intervene in affairs. We are lobbying internationally, just as the ANC itself lobbied internationally when it had the differences with the apartheid government. And fundamentally, we're an organisation that's existed for a number of years. We are fighting for something that is constitutionally permissible, it's legal, and it's something that will improve the lives of the Western Cape people significantly. And ultimately, we've been advocating for Cape independence for a number of time. We've engaged with many of the political organisations, including the presidency, including the Western Cape Premier. So this isn't something that's new. We want to have a referendum held in the Western Cape to allow the people of the Western Cape themselves to decide democratically, would they like to break away from South Africa? Is that the solution that they collectively want? Or do they want to remain in South Africa? And we have to understand the backdrop of that is, since 1994, the majority of Western Cape voters have never once voted for the ANC, and they've never once been governed at a national level by the government they voted for. So what does Cape independence deliver? It's not some scheme that's behind the scenes. It's really simple. The people of the Western Cape are not being governed by the party they vote for. Yeah. Cape independence would allow them to be governed by the party they vote for, and I think that should be understandable for anybody in a democracy.
Yeah.
Well, that was the conversation between Clement Manjatela on SABC last week with Phil Craig, who represents or leads the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, saying that they are going to the United States because they feel that some of the laws that are passed in this country, really, they are anti white people. They are racist, and those kind of laws cannot be accepted, and that is why they are going to the United States, and they are saying that like the ANC, engage international community. But the point that he is missing, this gentleman, is that it was a different thing during that time. Apartheid was horrific. Apartheid was a crime against humanity. And now the circumstances under which they are going to the United States are purely different from the circumstances under which the ANC went to international community seeking support, including the United States. There's a clip that maybe we'll play another time where the former President Joe Biden really in the Senate House in the United States. That was back in 1980s, late early 1980s or mid 1980s, where he was actually very angry with the Republican administration at the time, to say that you cannot allow these barbaric actions to take place in South Africa, where black people in majority are actually being mistreated by the government that you, as the current administration of the United States, are supporting. On to another story that has actually kept us hooked to our newspapers, and who reads the newspaper these days? To our phones, reading news articles and our TV screens, is that the group of the group of parliamentarians across the globe, over 100 parliamentarians across the world, have signed an open letter calling on the United States of America, President Donald Trump, to actually, stop or revoke the 7th February executive order that actually has cut aid from South Africa on the AIDS program, and we spoke about this in the opening. And this group said that this decree is punishing a sovereign country for pursuing the policy and objectives of its choice at home and abroad. And of course, here they're talking about Expropriation Act. They're talking about the Bella Act, which AfriForum, their argument in the United States is premised on these two pieces of legislation, the Bella Act as well as the Expropriation Act, saying that South Africa cannot be told what to do and what not to do by another country on the other part of the world. So this group of parliamentarians across the globe, and I've seen that list, as parliamentarians from Netherlands, the UK, Belgium, Sweden, everywhere, supporting South Africa on this call. And of course, the last one before we go into a break is the Rwanda DRC peace talks, which took place in Qatar last week. And of course, as I said, there's a deal, ceasefire deal, and we are going to hear more about this deal with Tendai Mbanje, who will be joining us right after the break. We are going to take a break. When we come back from the break, we are going to straight into our conversation with Tendai Mbanje right after this.
The Africa Center for Work-Based Learning is a professional development center for professionals who aim to improve their professional standing. This means that the learning programs we run are more than just academic programs. They are work-based programs that focus on leveraging your current experience as a professional to build your overall profile. A year down the line, the Africa Center for Work-Based Learning is developing into a preferred center for professional development in Pretoria, with 8 professional development faculties including accounting, teaching, entrepreneurship, as well as IT and many more. For more information, go to acwbl.org or dial +27 12 751 7608. The Africa Center for Work-Based Learning, where work is learning.
Welcome back to The Cycle this evening with me, your host, Mogale Mothale, right here on Vuka Online Radio. On the line, I have Tendai Mbanje, as I've just said before we took a break, that we are going to be talking about something that has gotten us talking in the last few months. Tendai, good evening and welcome to Vuka.
Thank you so much. Good evening, and also special greetings to your listeners.
Thank you so much, Tendai. What has been happening in the last few months? One can, we just don't even know where to start. A lot has happened. But in a way, we have expected this, but not at this rate. The US-South Africa relations have taken a different turn, something that actually has shaken the world, not only South Africans, but the entire world. We have seen over 100 MPs from across the globe last week signing that open letter condemning what the US government is doing on South Africa. In your own observation, how would you describe the current state of the US-South Africa relations considering the current developments?
Thank you so much for this important question. I think we all can agree, analysts, researchers, and commentators on all platforms, whether it's politics, law, international relations, or so forth, we all agree that South Africa-US relations at this stage is at its lowest. It has been exacerbated by lack of communication between South African officials and the US government. There's been a communication breakdown. There's been misunderstanding. And from what we saw, for example, the President of Africa, some of them were not a true representation of what is actually happening. For example, we are looking at the Data Appropriation Act. What Elon Musk, for example, has tweeted around the person of Julius Malema. Some of them were taken and over-amplified and taken out of context.
Mm-hmm.
So in my view, I do think there's something, a lack of communication, misunderstanding, and also involvement of third parties that some are South African nationals that they've been interacting with the Trump administration and causing a lot of misunderstanding and causing a gap in the relations between the two republics, the two countries, yes.
And you just spoke about some non-state actors. I mean, we can talk about groups like AfriForum, Solidarity, the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. These kind of groupings that have been spreading, what we can actually just be clear about it, that has been spreading lies, and those lies has actually negatively impacted on the relationship between these two countries. Now, at this point, as I'm talking to you, Ebrahim Rasool was expelled from the United States, and now we have a process of appointing a new ambassador to the United States. How do you see this process going? Do you think that the person who will be appointed will be able to salvage that which is still left, if there's anything that is still left to salvage between these two nations?
So when you look at I start commenting on the role of non-state actors, which is namely groupings within South Africa, spreading news that does not truly reflect what's happening in South Africa. I think that is unacceptable. And I understand that there's some legal action that is being indicated by certain groups around such actions, because you cannot, in good faith, or say things about your country that you know that are detrimental to the development and to the strengthening your country in the global space. I think that that is in itself self-defeating the standing of South Africa in the global space. Tensions within South Africa, between South Africa and the US, will not benefit South African citizens. And those South African citizens who are at the forefront doing that are basically self-defeating, because it's going to work against them. When you look at the person of Ebrahim Rasool, notwithstanding the circumstances in which he was expelled, it shows a worsening relationship. And of course, it was announced on Twitter, on X. And imagine that instead of being issued with the formal documents before something is put on X, and then you receive a message through X that you've been expelled, you have been deemed a persona non grata. It's a sign of also disrespect for those who deem you persona non grata. So there is a gap in terms of the broken relationship. The appointment of the new ambassador should be someone, in my view, who is an experienced diplomat, who also need an experienced team around him to navigate such a relationship to go and rebuild. Yes, there is still an opportunity. Yes, there's a broken relationship, but I believe so. I believe that the US and South Africa are still in a position to interact and be able to find each other and share areas of mutual cooperation and interest. The US is the biggest partner of South Africa in terms of trade. Many US companies are in South Africa. US citizens have interest in South Africa. US companies have interest in South Africa. And also the US as a global superpower cannot exclude South Africa from its cooperation and from its as an ally or as a friend. So having friendly relations with South Africa will benefit the US to have also good influence in Africa as a whole. South Africa is a key player. You may realize that countries that are allies with South Africa may be gravitated towards moving away from the US if such relations are maintained. And also work against the US.
And the disagreements between the two nations, we know that they are not actually just starting now with the Trump administration. Our stance on the global issues such as South Africa supporting Palestine, openly supporting Palestine, and our relationship with Iran, in a way driving a long-term diplomatic rift. Given these tensions, is there a risk of a further diplomatic retaliation between the two countries, in your view?
It's very difficult to tell because where there's diplomatic shortfall, it's a sign of unmet need. Conflict happens when certain needs are not met. I do believe when such needs, when such interests are met, there's always a positive outcome of such. So in my view, any conflict, no matter of what serious nature it can be, is a result of needs that are not met, interests that are not conflicting interests. So there is always a room to address such. So it is not in the best interest of these nations to gravitate against each other, to move away from each other, but there is more benefit for nations to actually cooperate.
And considering the current geopolitical and multilateral issues at the global stage, and also looking at where South Africa has positioned itself, how do you think South Africa can do what I can maybe, for the lack of a better word, do a balancing act diplomatically in order to maintain good relations with the United States, of course, even though we have these tensions, but we know that these are countries that really need each other. We have China, Russia. We know that we have historical connection to Russia and relations with Russia, and broadly, even at BRICS level. Do you think that South Africa, what kind of balancing act do you think South Africa needs to do in order to maintain these relations?
I think South Africa needs to stick to its foreign policy, however, to review also some of the things within its foreign policy that has been causing too much contestation. And not necessarily that it has to shift its principles, but it has to find ways to accommodate those nations that are antagonistic to South Africa's position. South Africa still accommodate nations that seem to disagree with it, but while at the same time accommodating also needs of those who are friendly to South Africa's foreign policy. I think that's the role of diplomacy, to be able to balance that. So if South Africa is failing, then to do such then means that our diplomats in the Republic are failing to navigate such a complexity. It is one of the most trying times in the history of South Africa, where its foreign policy is causing a reaction and could potentially make the South Africa sanctioned at a global level by its global superpowers. But navigating such a challenge, I think that is what identified with this government. But at the same time, this government is a GNU government, and it becomes also very difficult for the president and his cabinet, considering the composition of the GNU, to fully navigate such complexity. Because if it was the ANC government, it could have been much easier.
You know, my leader, I just want us to take a short break. I want us to, when we come back from the break, just to take few moments. If we don't actually have enough time, take few minutes just to reflect on the recent developments in the DRC. We have seen the ceasefire deal, signed in Qatar last week by the two nations. We just want to touch on that right after this short break. Stay tuned.
How do you know the life of personal coach you're about to work with is who they say they are? How do you know if they can do the job? At the Africa Board for Coaching, Consulting and Coaching Psychology, we can tell you. So, before you share your secrets and spend your money, check with us first. Visit www.abccccp.com or call us on 012-751-7608. The ABCCP, the professional body for coaches.
Welcome back to The Cycle this evening with me, Mogale Mothale. On the line, we are joined by Tendai Mbanje, who has been with us for the last few minutes and still with us. We thank him for making time to be with us this evening. Just before we took a break, Tendai, we were reflecting on the US-South Africa relations, and we spoke a lot about what does this mean for both these two nations. At this point, I want us to just talk about this. On the 7th of February, there's been a lot of executive orders that Donald Trump has signed. Just a day after his inauguration, on the 7th of February, he signed an executive order cutting aid to South Africa, which affects South Africa's effort to fight HIV and AIDS. We have heard from the Minister of Health, Aaron Motsoaledi, saying that actually that support, that financial support, has affected about 15,000 employees who were actually employed by PEPFAR, who were benefiting from this aid. So with that cut, 15,000 employees are now out of a job. I've spoken to one who was part of this program, who has been home for some time now. And we also know that other efforts to fight HIV and other diseases are also going to be affected. How significant is this decision, and how, or maybe what impact might it have on the bilateral relations between these two nations?
Yes, so definitely the cutting of aid was untimely. It has been seen by many as abrupt and a reaction from the Trump to Africa and many other parts of the continent that have suffered that blow, that huge blow. And particularly in the context of South Africa, it has been interpreted as a sign of breakdown of the relationship. You know that the fight of HIV has been very crucial and very dear to some of the policies of the South African government. It has been also very critical in the sense that it has also managed to to put afloat the health system, combating or managing HIV/AIDS has been one of the successes of the South African government. So I do believe that from the viewpoint of the citizens, while the government could put other measures to cover that gap, which is also going to strain the budgetary, it has budgetary constraints and implications to that with regards to that cut. Citizens view it as a punishment to South Africa, as a reaction, as a sign that there is a breakdown of our relationship. And also, the budgets most of the time, or the reasons that have been used by Elon Musk and President Trump, has been indicating that they've been cutting aid to areas where there has been corruption, misuse of funds, and so forth. But in the context of South Africa's the cutting of aid, which has been going to good use, while it is not a right, they do not have a right to that aid. It's sign of commitment, of friendship and support to each other. But it is seen that the reasons are not compelling. So it is also one of those things that seem to be bringing about tension between the US and South Africa and those allies of South Africa. I don't know if I make sense.
Tendai, there's a lot that we can talk about from the US South Africa relations currently, and I'm sure that there's still a lot to come. We know that the renaming of the Suntan Drive to Leila Khalid is also another issue that has really raised a whole lot of questions and also anger from the US government. At some point, they said that they were going to close the consulate in Sandton. I'm not sure if this is just a diplomatic posturing, but I don't think, at the same time, I don't think that Donald Trump is playing around. I don't trust him anymore. So, but at this point,
he seems to be a man of his words. So
yeah.
Sometimes it's to the benefit of all of us to take his word as it is.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's why the presidency said that that matter has been is now I think it's under review in the Johannesburg Council, and I don't see that renaming taking place anytime soon. But now let's shift gears a little bit and come back home, come back to the issues that are plaguing the African continent. We have seen the DRC and Rwanda, just about a week ago in Qatar. Qatar as the mediator in this conflict, where both countries reaffirmed their commitment to bringing an end, or at least starting or on a good note in terms of signing a deal on a ceasefire and making sure that they allow peace talks. But it is not actually clear how that is going to work out. If you look at their joint statement, how is that going to work out, the whole ceasefire deal? How do you read these current developments that are taking place in DRC, considering the fact that the talks were actually supposed to be taking place in Angola, but they were cancelled because of the EU imposing sanctions on some M23 members?
Thank you. I think the developments, for an optimist, I'm always an optimist, they are one step in a good direction. But the problem that we have with such developments is that there are also many third parties who are interacting with both Rwanda and the DRC with interest in the conflict. You remember that studies around this conflict show that there are people who are benefiting. There are stakeholders who are benefiting from this conflict. You know, during time of conflict, it's not always about talking about the death, destruction, migration, among other things. There are people who are mining. There are people with economic interests who are benefiting from this. So while this is a positive way to say let's allow peace talk to unfold, but if there's no comprehensive plan and also in alternatives that are outlined, and also who is in that plan to facilitate that particular process, it becomes quite difficult. I definitely know that peace talks are not guaranteed to be successful generally. You need to leave room for failure, and it generally happens when perhaps needs are not met for both parties in conflict. While we acknowledge that there are developments, the actual process then becomes very crucial to determine real and sustainable peace.
And for an ordinary South African somewhere in Lesotho, I don't know why I'm mentioning Lesotho. Never mind what Donald Trump said about Lesotho. One can ask themselves, why do we have these talks taking place somewhere in Qatar when we have, the African countries here, we have the regional blocks, we have the continental bloc that can really facilitate those talks. We often hear of African problems to African solutions. Why do we see another country somewhere in the Middle East coming and becoming a mediator in our own affairs that we as Africans, one can say that we are capacitated to really deal with those?
True. I mean, you're raising something that is very important. You can't be a mediator when you are not interested or vested in the conflict. You can't be a mediator who is not benefiting from that particular situation. It could be not material benefit, but there's some form of benefit that you get. For example, if you manage to broker a deal of such a nature, you become an influential power globally. This conflict has attracted international attention. If Qatar manages to broker a sustainable peace, what does it say for Qatar's reputation in the global community, in the global space? So while we are seeing this is also a very disgraceful situation where our own African countries are not trusted or do not have that moral authority to put two conflicting parties in the same room and be listened to. So it really speaks to our own values, our own Pan-Africanism, our own relationship, interstate relationship. You know, for example, that South Africa is a country that has capacity to facilitate peace talks, but South Africa's relations with Rwanda it's not a healthy one. You know, for example, and South Africa has played an instrumental role in sending some troops to the DRC, for example. All member states troop contributing countries to SAMI DRC could not be trusted by Rwanda, for example, as countries holding moral authority to have that particular crucial life-giving peace talk. So it really speaks to lack of force of our own mechanisms that we have within the African Union, within SADC, to actually be able to convincingly and get that trust and put conflicting parties in the same room and facilitate a dialogue that can bring about change and sustainable peace.
And you know, Tendai, I want to let you go, but there's one last question in a minute, because it's not for the first time. I think about a week or so ago, we saw the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine taking place. Taking place somewhere in Doha. I mean, not in Doha, but in Dubai. And one asks yourself, are we beginning to see Middle East in a way beginning to play that mediation role, and as a result positioning itself as a peacemaker across the globe?
I think if you were to look at Doha, if you were to look at Dubai, all those Qatar and so forth, what we're seeing in that particular region, these players have managed to position themselves as neutral to most conflicts happening globally. They are not in direct confrontational with other nations. So you realize that they've repositioned themselves. They're well developed in terms of infrastructure, stable economies. It also counts to you being able to put people in the same room. It's not like so moral authority among nations also comes with the development, whether it's from infrastructure, stable governance, and also stability of the nation. So you realize that countries that are going through economic hardships, that are going through political instability, do not have that moral authority to be able to put such nations in conflict in the same room. So there is also that expectation when you want to bring nations together. What do you have that is exceptional? What qualities can we learn from you as a mediator? Even if the mediator sometimes they have to provide the cost of the facilities that are used, the hotels, the resources to bring the negotiators to table, and sometimes these negotiations take long, and all those need resources. And Qatar and its neighbors, they are in a position to do that. They have resources, they have stability, but economically and politically they are wealthy. So hence they are in a position to do that. African countries that are really struggling, most of them are really struggling, cannot be in a position to do that, and also to sponsor resources where need arise, because such talks are never short and never easy. So that there's always a complexity that needs those nations that are stable and are very strong economically as well to be able to navigate those dynamics.
Tendai, we can talk about this the whole night, but we are not going to do that because we have run out of time. But thank you so much for making time to be with us this evening.
Thank you so much, and thank you for always inviting me to your shows.
Thank you so much, Tendai. Well, that was Tendai Mbanje, who has been helping us to unpack the U.S.-South Africa relations and also the recent developments taking place in the DRC. We are going to leave it here for the cycle this evening until we meet again next week, Monday from 6 until 7 p.m. right here on Vuka Online Radio. It's a good evening from me, and God bless you.
The home of inspiration every day.
Most people give up on themselves easily. You know the human spirit is powerful.
From news,
Countries across the globe have been hit by the COVID-19 virus.
views,
There's a global trend to see an increase in GBV incidences, specifically domestic violence.
sports,
What's he say? It's a really good ball. It's Shabalala.
and music to inspire you every day. This is Vuka Online, your inspiration radio station.